When she detaches, his ego begins to collapse. Carl Jung. Have you ever wondered why the silence of a woman cuts deeper than her words? Why her withdrawal can shatter a man's world more violently than any argument? Jung believed that within every man lies an animate, the feminine essence buried beneath the armor of his ego. When a woman pulls away, when she no longer feeds his pride with her attention, his carefully constructed facade begins to crumble, exposing the rawness he has tried so hard to conceal. A man lives on mirrors. His ego drinks from reflections. The admiration in a woman's eyes, the warmth of her presence, the certainty that she orbits his gravity. But when she detaches, the mirror vanishes. He no longer sees himself through her adoration. What remains is emptiness, a hollow space he cannot fill with his own reflection. In Jungian terms, he is forced to confront his shadow, that dark, neglected self he has spent years denying. The silence of a woman drags him toward the very depths of himself, a place he has never dared to enter. For centuries, women have been told that their power rests in giving, in nurturing, in tending to the wounds of men. But the unspoken truth is that their greatest power emerges in stillness, in restraint, in the refusal to feed the insatiable appetite of the male ego. Detachment is not cruelty, it is revelation. It strips a man of his illusions and demands. He faced the truth that his worth is not sustained by conquest or control, but by a soul unexamined and a heart unmastered. Some men collapse when faced with this silence. They spiral into obsession, confusion, even rage. Why? Because detachment starves the child within them, the boy who never learned to exist without the constant reassurance of a woman's gaze. That boy becomes restless when ignored. He becomes addicted when denied. He becomes dangerous when unseen. Jung wrote that what we do not make conscious will rule us from the shadows, blaming the very woman whose silence is forcing him to confront himself. But for the woman, detachment is not about Hemet, it's about reclaiming herself. To detach is to step away from the endless cycle of proving, of giving, of molding oneself into the shape of his desires. It is the quiet rebellion against the archetype of the self-sacrificing feminine. It is the awakening of the sovereign woman, who no longer seeks validation through the eyes of another. Her detachment is the sacred moment when she whispers to herself, "I am enough," even without being chosen. This is why men fear silence. They fear the pause, the empty space where once there was devotion. They mistake silence for punishment, but in truth, it is a lesson. The lesson that no woman can carry the weight of their insecurities forever. The lesson that true intimacy requires depth, not dominance. And yet, paradoxically, it is often this very silence that awakens desire more powerfully than affection ever could. When she detaches, his mind becomes a battlefield. The absence of her attention feels like a wound. He replays her words, imagines her indifference, obsesses over her calm. The more she retreats, the more he chases not because he loves purely, but because his ego cannot bear the collapse of control. The irony is cruel. The more she detaches, the more power she holds. Not because she manipulates, but because she finally embodies the truth of her own value. Jung believed that relationships are mirrors reflecting our inner worlds. When she withdraws, she becomes a mirror turned away, forcing him to stare into the abyss of himself. For some men, this abyss is unbearable. For others, it becomes the catalyst for transformation the moment they begin their own shadow work. The moment they learn to love, not through ego, but through soul. Imagine it now. A woman who no longer begs, who no longer explains, who no longer justifies. Her silence is not empty, is full of meaning. Her detachment is not absence, is presence, but presence within herself. This is the kind of feminine energy that terrifies men, because it cannot be controlled, cannot be bought, cannot be owned. It is mystery incarnate, the archetypal feminine in her most powerful form. She becomes the high priestess, the one who sits between the conscious and unconscious worlds, untouchable and serene. And when a man meets such energy, he has two choices: or transform, allowing her silence to awaken the dormant depths of his soul. This is why detachment is not merely a tactic of attraction, it is a spiritual initiation. A woman who detaches is not simply leaving him behind. She is guiding him, unwillingly, into the dark corridors of his own psyche, and there, in the silence, she leaves behind. He must finally face the truth of who he is without her. Her detachment lingers like a ghost in his mind, haunting him with questions he cannot answer. Why does her silence feel louder than her words ever did? Why does her absence occupy more space than her presence once claimed? In truth, it is not her absence he mourns, it is the loss of the reflection she once offered. The ego is fragile, built on borrowed glances and fleeting affirmations, and when deprived of its mirror, it trembles, it breaks, it collapses. Jung would say that what collapses is not the man himself, but the image of himself he believed to be real. This collapse is both agony and initiation. Many men will run from it, seeking distraction in another woman's attention, in the shallow comfort of conquest, in work, wealth, or endless pursuits of validation. But no matter how many faces he chases, no matter how many voices whisper admiration. The silence of the one who detached will echo inside him like an unfinished symphony. She becomes the reminder of a lesson unlearned, the mirror he cannot replace. And yet, only through this collapse can true growth begin if he dares to face it. For the woman, the act of detachment is not vengeance. It is liberation. It is the recognition that her worth does not rise or fall based on a man's recognition of it. When she detaches, she is no longer the caretaker of his ego. She becomes the guardian of her own soul. This transformation is subtle, yet seismic. She no longer moves from hunger, but from fullness. She no longer bends to be chosen, but stands to choose. This is the essence of Jung's individuation, the integration of the shadow, the reclaiming of lost fragments, the union of one's inner world into wholeness. Men sense this wholeness instinctively. A woman who detaches radiates an energy that unsettles the unprepared. She no longer clings, so she cannot be controlled. She no longer explains, so she cannot be argued down. She no longer seeks, so she cannot be bought. In her silence lies a deep mystery, the kind that awakens both desire and fear. This mystery is not a performance. It is the natural consequence of a woman who has turned inward, who has chosen self-possession over self-sacrifice. And here lies the paradox. The more she withdraws into herself, the more magnetic she becomes. Not because she intends it, but because men, at their core, are drawn to what they cannot fully grasp. The feminine, in its detached state, embodies the archetype of the eternal unknown, the moon that pulls tides without effort, the flame that burns without begging to be seen. This archetypal allure stirs something ancient in the male psyche, obsession born not of love, but of the ego's desperate attempt to reclaim what it has lost. Yet obsession is not love. It is fear dressed in desire, attachment disguised as longing. Jung warned that what is denied in the unconscious emerges as fate. And here it reveals itself. The man who cannot let go of the detached woman is not bound by her, but by his own unresolved shadows. He projects onto her the mother who withheld affection, the lover who abandoned him, the emptiness he has carried all his life. She is no longer herself in his eyes. She becomes the stage upon which his inner wounds perform. And so he clings not to her, but to the illusion that if he can win her back, he can silence the chaos inside him. But for the woman, the silence deepens. Each day of detachment is a step further into her sovereignty, a reminder that love is not meant to suffocate, but to breathe. Her absence teaches him what her presence could not, that devotion cannot be demanded, that intimacy cannot be built on control, that respect is the foundation upon which attraction either thrives or dies. She becomes a silent teacher, and whether he learns the lesson depends not on her, but on his willingness to confront himself. Consider the stillness of a river at night. On the surface, there is calm, but beneath, unseen currents move with power and certainty. So too with feminine detachment. To the untrained eye, it appears as coldness, indifference, even cruelty. It is the quiet strength of a woman who no longer needs to prove her worth through devotion to another. Her silence is not emptiness, is the fullness of herself. And when men encounter this fullness, they are confronted with a truth they cannot escape. A woman's value is not measured by how much of herself she gives away. She protects what is sacred within her. To detach is to say, without words, I am no longer willing to carry what is not mine. If you collapse without my presence, it was never me you loved. It was the reflection of yourself you saw in my eyes. Type, continue to receive the next part. Type, continue to receive the next part. His collapse is not always loud. Sometimes it comes quietly in the late hours when he lies awake, replaying her silence like a song he cannot escape. He wonders why her absence pierces him so much more deeply than her presence ever did. Truth is simple but unbearable. When she detached, she took with her the scaffolding upon which his ego had been built. Without her attention, his sense of power falters. Without her validation, his image fractures. Jung understood this as the dissolution of projection, when a man no longer sees the woman as a screen for his fantasies. He must face the reality of who he is without her reflection, and this reality terrifies him. The masculine ego often thrives on conquest, control, and certainty. But detachment strips all of these illusions away. Suddenly, the woman who once answered every message, who once soothed every insecurity, who once mirrored back his imagined strength, is gone. In her silence, he hears only himself, and he does not like what he finds. This is why her absence feels like cruelty to him, though it is not. It is simply the withdrawal of a mirror he depended upon to avoid facing his own shadow. For the woman, however, detachment is the beginning of clarity. No longer clouded by the emotional noise of his demands, she begins to see herself with fresh eyes. She remembers the dreams she set aside, the passions she buried, the voice she silenced to keep his world intact. Detachment becomes a sacred act of remembrance. She is not only withdrawing from him, but returning to herself. And, as she does, her energy shifts. She becomes radiant in her independence, magnetic, not because she seeks attention, but because she no longer needs it. This shift is the essence of archetypal feminine power. It is not forceful, not loud, not aggressive. It is the quiet strength of the woman who stands centered, unshaken by whether she is adored or ignored. Jung might call it the anima in her highest form, the bridge between the seen and unseen, the conscious and unconscious, the flesh and the spirit. She embodies mystery, and it is this mystery that awakens desire in men more fiercely than any pursuit could. For nothing captivates the male psyche more than what it cannot fully possess. But there is a hidden danger in this dynamic. The man who cannot tolerate his collapse will often try to reclaim control through intensity. He may flood her with apologies, promises, even rage. He may project blame onto her, insisting she is cold, manipulative, heartless. These are only the cries of an ego fighting for survival. The irony is that the more he grasps, the more she withdraws. For a woman who has tasted her own sovereignty cannot return to the prison of dependency. Detachment, once awakened, cannot be undone, and here lies the paradox that tears at him most. Her distance fuels his obsession. He finds himself replaying memories, searching for clues, reading into her silence as if it were a language he could decipher. But the truth he cannot accept is this: her silence is not about him, it is about her. It is the voice of a woman who has chosen herself over the endless cycle of soothing his insecurities. It is the act of stepping out of his story and into her own. This is why her detachment feels dangerous to him. It exposes the reality that love cannot be sustained by ego, that attraction built on possession is brittle, that true intimacy requires a man to face not only the woman before him, but the unexamined shadow within himself. Many men are unprepared for this confrontation. They would rather label her silence as cruelty than admit that it has revealed the hollowness inside them. Yet some will take this collapse as the beginning of their own awakening. In the ashes of her absence, they will discover the need to grow, to heal, to finally become whole without leaning on another for completion. For the woman, this outcome does not matter. She does not detach to teach him a lesson, though lessons may emerge. She does not withdraw to wound him, though wounds may open. She detaches because her soul demands it, because she has learned that her worth is not proven in sacrifice. And in this choice, she becomes untouchable, not because she is unreachable, but because she no longer fears being alone. There is a deep beauty in this state. She becomes like the moon, distant yet luminous, silent yet powerful enough to pull oceans. She does not beg to be seen, yet her light cannot be ignored. Men may orbit her, longing to draw closer, but she no longer shapes herself to keep them near. Instead, she moves on her own path, serene, magnetic, whole. And in this wholeness lies the greatest paradox of all. The woman who no longer needs him becomes the one he cannot forget. His pursuit becomes a labyrinth, and every turn leads him back to the same haunting realization. She is gone, at least, in the way he once knew her. The woman who once offered her devotion now walks in silence, her energy no longer orbiting his world. He mistakes this as rejection, but it is far deeper, is transcendence. Jung observed that every attachment we cling to eventually forces us to confront our own unconscious dependence. Her detachment is that confrontation embodied, and it shakes him to his very core. He begins to remember her differently now, not as the woman who comforted him, but as the mystery that unsettled him. Every detail becomes magnified in his memory. The way her eyes once looked through him, the way her silence carried unspoken truths, the way she moved with quiet certainty. He is tormented not by what she said, but by what she withheld. This is the torment of the ego when confronted with mystery. It cannot conquer what it does not understand. For her, the silence is no torment at all, it is a sanctuary. She learns the sacred art of detachment, not as a tactic, but as a way of living. The Stoics spoke of ataraxia, the unshakable calm of a soul free from the chains of external approval. In her detachment, she embodies this state. She is no longer enslaved by his moods, his validation, or his absence. She has entered the inner citadel. Marcus Aurelius spoke of the fortress within herself that no one can breach. This is not coldness. This is sovereignty. And when a woman embodies sovereignty, she becomes untamable. Men feel this instinctively. But it is not the superficial allure of beauty or charm, it is the deeper allure of independence. She does not seek, and so she cannot be captured. She does not plead, and so she cannot be dismissed. She is the storm and the calm, the absence and the fullness, the paradox they cannot reconcile. This is the feminine mystery Jung called the anima in its fullest form, the eternal other. The hidden goddess within every man's psyche, always longed for, never fully possessed. The man's collapse deepens as he realizes he cannot force her return. Her silence cannot be argued with. Her distance cannot be bridged by desperation. He may try to punish her with his own absence, but his withdrawal is powerless compared to hers. He may attempt to lure her back with grand gestures, but she no longer needs what he offers. This imbalance terrifies him because it reveals a truth he has long denied. She holds the power not by controlling him, but by no longer needing him. This power, however, is not weaponized by her. It is not strategy, is awakening. She does not move to torment him. She moves to protect herself. She knows now that the woman who overgives becomes invisible, while the woman who preserves her essence becomes unforgettable. Her silence is not a punishment, but a boundary. Her distance is not cruelty, but clarity. Realizes that love cannot be born of desperation, nor can connection survive on ego's hunger alone. Still, he circles her in his mind, unable to let go. He feels her absence like a phantom limb, reaching instinctively for something that is no longer there. And this reaching is his undoing. For the more he grasps, the more he feels the emptiness of his own hand. It is in this emptiness that transformation might begin if he dares to embrace it. Jung wrote that the greatest tragedy is not the presence of suffering, but the refusal to integrate it. If he allows the collapse to teach him, he may rise anew, stronger, more whole, capable of love beyond ego. But if he resists, he remains imprisoned, forever haunted by the woman who detached. Meanwhile, she flourishes. Her detachment opens doors she once kept closed. She discovers parts of herself she had buried beneath the weight of his needs, the creative spark, the untamed wildness, the deep intuition. She becomes both softer and stronger, more compassionate, yet less compromising. She reclaims the rhythm of her own life, no longer synchronized with the unpredictable tides of his emotions. This is the quiet revolution of feminine power, not loud rebellion, but subtle reclamation. Her story is no longer about him. It is about the journey inward, the path of individuation where she gathers the fragments of herself and becomes whole. And as she does, her very existence becomes a mirror to the world, a reminder that a woman who detaches is not a woman who loses, but a woman who remembers who she truly is. Type, continue to receive the next part. Asterisk, type, continue. Receive the next part. And so, the silence stretches into something permanent, something unshakable. What was once a pause becomes a boundary. What was once uncertainty becomes strength. The man now lives with the echo of her absence. And though he may not admit it, he knows that her detachment has reshaped him. His ego, once inflated with the certainty of her devotion, now lies fractured. And in that fracture lies the possibility of awakening or the temptation of despair. Jung taught that collapse is not an ending, but an initiation, a threshold into the deeper layers of the psyche. Yet, not every man dares to cross it. Some will cling to their defenses, convincing themselves that she was cold, heartless, unworthy. But even as they speak these words, their hearts betray them. For a man never forgets the woman who detached with grace. He never forgets the silence that carried more power than words. She becomes not only a memory, but a symbol and archetype of the feminine he could not conquer. The mirror that once reflected him, but now reflects only herself. For her, detachment becomes a quiet unfolding, no longer bound by the weight of his need. She moves freely into her own being. The world looks different, now sharper, richer, alive with colors she once dimmed to keep the peace. She feels the steady rhythm of her own pulse, unshaken by his chaos. This is not indifference. This is freedom. In her stillness, she learns that she does not have to chase, does not have to beg, does not have to perform. Her very existence is enough. And as she grows, she understands a truth that few dare to speak aloud. Love cannot be real if it demands the death of the self. True intimacy requires two souls who meet in fullness, not in hunger. Her detachment, then, is not the destruction of love, but its purification. It clears away the illusions, the projections, the ego-driven performances. What remains is something. Rare love that can only exist where there is freedom, respect, and choice. The man feels this distinction in ways he cannot explain. He realizes, perhaps too late, that her love was never truly his to command. It was a gift, fragile and sacred, and once taken for granted, it could not be demanded back. In her absence, he sees what he refused to honor in her presence. The quiet strength of a woman who knew how to give, but also knew when to walk away. His regret becomes his shadow, following him through every new connection, whispering of what he lost, yet she carries no regret. Her detachment has not hardened her heart, but has refined it. She no longer loves from desperation, but from abundance. She no longer fears solitude, for she has found companionship within herself. This is her individuation, her rebirth, the process Jung described as becoming whole. Not through another, but through the integration of her own soul. And in this wholeness, she becomes untouchable. Not because no man can reach her, but because no man can define her. Others may wonder at her strength, mistaking it for coldness, but those who look closely see something different. They see serenity, the calm of a woman who has walked through fire and no longer fears being burned. They see desire without attachment, intimacy without dependence, love without chains. This is the paradox of the detached woman. She is both deeply loving and fiercely free. She can give, but she does not need to. She can stay, but she can also walk away without looking back. And this is where her story ends not in his collapse, but in her ascension. He may continue to wrestle with the shadows her absence revealed. He may spiral into obsession, or he may rise into transformation. That choice belongs to him. But her path is clear. She no longer carries his weight, no longer feeds his illusions, no longer ties her worth to his recognition. She has returned to herself, and in that return, she has found everything she was seeking all along. The woman who knows her worth doesn't chase, she chooses. End.